Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Saturday's Kepler College Community Webinar. We are so excited to present the solar phase of Venus with Shu. Hi, Shu. We're so happy to have you.
I'm so happy to be here, and thanks for being here, everyone.
Okay, some logistics. If you have issues with your audio throughout the presentation, here are some tricks that you can try to bring it back into life. The first step is to check your audio settings, make sure you're using the right speaker, make sure that your volume is turned up, and if all else fails, log out and come right back in. Here's another option. So if you have a question, you can feel free to ask it in the Q&A, which I see a lot of you are using beautifully. And I just want to make that known. We do not have a chat function, but we do have a Q&A. And I'll be happy to answer as many questions as possible throughout the presentation. Shu has been so generous to allow for that. And another thing, we have closed captioning, which is the primary reason why we've switched to Zoom. If you like to enable closed captioning, just hit that little CC and you can click show subtitle. Here are some questions we get, and I just thought I'd whittle these down. Will you receive a copy of the webinar? Yes, you will receive a replay link of the webinar, and that will be up for 2 weeks. And the second question, can I ask personal questions about my chart? Unfortunately, or fortunately, this is a collective experience. So we do not look at the personal charts in this webinar, but if you'd like to contact Shu for a reading or check out more events that they have going on, feel free to do so. Can you ask questions? I've already answered that question, where you can do so in the Q&A, and I'd be happy to verbalize that for you. And then, can I download the webinar? The webinar video copy is a viewable link, but it is not downloadable. Just to let you know, we have self-paced classes, which give you the opportunity to take classes, whether you're pursuing the certificate, the diploma, or just interested in astrology at your own pace, in your own time. And this is really helpful for that flexibility at home education. Here are some of our classes we have coming up in fall. We still have the early bird discount that is applicable to all of them. We also have the ASL new pilot class, which begins in fall, and we're very excited about that. And Zoom has really allowed us to teach in this way that is all inclusive. So we're very excited and hope you'll join us for the fall term. Here are some upcoming webinars and workshops. You can check these out on our site. I want to make sure you are aware that Shu is doing another amazing workshop for us on October 2nd, and I know she'll talk more about that, and I just want to highlight it for you here. And then I want to mention our scholarship funds. Now, there are 2 different scholarships, and just so you know, every donation we get from our webinars goes into our scholarship fund. So anyone who wants to access important astrological education can do so with your help. And Kepler also matches every single donation we get. So if we get up to like $1,000, then we can absolutely give someone a full scholarship. And I will post the link for donations in the Q&A after I share my screen, so you can do so, and we'll just keep monitoring this throughout the presentation. Now, for the main event, just want to bring Shu in to talk a little bit about what are we exploring today with the solar cycle of Venus. I've personally not heard much about it, so I'm eager. Can you tell us a little bit about what we're exploring?
Yeah, sure. Today we've got a lot to get through. We're going to be looking at the astronomical movements of Venus in her synodic cycle, or the solar phase cycle. Because that took me ages to get my head around, and I wanted to just show people the astronomical movements, because we then translate these astronomical movements into symbolic meaning. And we do this by also telling the myth of Inanna. And then I want to get everyone to look up their own Venus phase cycle, and we'll break all of these down into what a better way, or a more nuanced way to be able to interpret your Venus placements. We also look at how we can then use this symbolic meaning of the Venus solar phase cycle in transits, and a little bit about how we can work with it magically and ceremonially, like based on the Sumerian rituals and ceremonies.
Oh my goodness, this is exciting. No, this is great. Wow.
Yeah,
This is
so just to warn
what a
people,
treat.
the beginning can be a little bit dry because we are talking about astronomy, but I'm hoping that will that you can sort of get through that, and then we get to the juicy parts.
Yeah, we have a good group and we have a great teacher, so I'm sure we'll be fine. Okay, and then obviously we want to know more about you. I can read your bio, but I'm more interested in hearing it from you. What are you passionate about, and what brings you here today with Kepler?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm clearly passionate about astrology, and I started astrology when I had my first nodal return at 19, and I've been doing it ever since. And I got completely wrapped up in the whole ancient translation sort of movement. And so I shifted my perspective about 10 years ago into being all traditional. Since I also am a farmer, and the astrology is very much a lifestyle for me, and I do everything on the property and on the farm based on what I know in astrology. I'm also really inspired by the Hermetic philosophy. I make lots of things on the farm, like medicinal type stuff, just even art. I'm also an artist, and my main sort of school that I study on my own, but the main teachings that I've had formally have been the School of Traditional Astrology, Deb Holding's group in London, and started at the Melbourne School of Astrology. And so that's a little bit about me.
Wow, I want to visit that farm.
Sounds I'm
amazing.
Always looking for woofers if you can travel.
There you go.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so on that note, I'm going to hand the screen over to you. Okay, so I've stopped my share.
So just so that we know, we've got about, is it an hour and 20 minutes remaining? Is that
yes.
What time we've got? Okay. All right. So do I share my screen now?
Yes, that would be amazing. Your beautiful presentation.
Okay. Excellent. So can everyone see my screen right now?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So, today, as we're talking about the synodic cycle, or the solar phase
really
cycle.
quick, sorry, Shu. Do you want to put it in presentation mode? Or would you rather leave it?
I thought I was in presentation mode. Is that, I can't get it. I'm according to me, I'm actually in presentation mode. So.
Okay. Earlier you were able to fill up the whole screen, but if
was I?
If we can't do that right now, that's fine. This is still good.
Okay, so you can't see my notes, you can just see the slides.
I can just see, I see the slides, and then I see your URL and the reading list and all of that. So I don't know if you wanted to show that or not.
Oh, right. Okay. I don't know how to do that, actually. I don't know what I did before. I might leave it just because I'm not very good at technology.
That's okay.
Sorry, everybody. So basically synodic cycles is the relationship between the sun and a planet from the perspective of our Earth. And today we're talking about Venus's synodic cycle. So if we look at the sort of the etymology of the meaning of synodic, it comes from the Greek term synodos, which is a meaning of coming together, or some kind of meeting, or a sexual union or assembly. And it's made up of two components, which is syn, together, and hodos, which is traveling, a journey or a way or a system or a path. So a synodic cycle in essence is the coming together of two planets on some systemized pathway, which is what we're going to be looking at in detail today. And I mentioned this before, we'll look at the astronomy and the symbolism, and then we'll apply this to our natal charts and look at how we can look at this cycle in transits as well as in magical ceremonial ways. So to encapsulate, this is just my depiction of what the Venus synodic cycle looks like. It's 584 days, and it comprises of various different conditions, like whether, and we're going to go through this, whether it's combust, applying or separating to the sun, being morning or evening star, being visible or invisible, direct or retrograde. And we're going to be pulling all of this apart today. But so just to break it down, because there are certain important parts of this 584 days, which we hopefully by the end of today, you will have in the back of your mind to look out for all the time. So the first is the interior conjunction, or what we call the inferior conjunction. And I've here got on the left the picture of what it might look like in the natal chart, or a circular chart. In the middle, I've got a picture of what it looks like in space. And then the little table here on the right are all the conditions that are relevant for this particular phase. And you'll see why, as we get on into the presentation, why these conditions are important. Essentially, we want to assess the condition of Venus based on the symbolism of her astronomical movements, if that makes sense. So the beginning is the conjunction here, the interior conjunction, when Venus, the orange planet, is between the sun and the earth, which is the gray planet. And some astrologers would consider, they don't consider this the beginning of the cycle, they consider the morning rise the beginning of the cycle, but I use this as my beginning point. And at this stage, Venus is extremely slow, it's also retrograde, and because she's in the combust phase, we can't see her. Now, this is the morning heliacal rise, and this is what some astrologers consider to be the beginning of the Venus cycle, because we can start to see her. She's come out of the beams of the sun, and you notice that in my table, she's moved from invisible to visible. And so at this stage, she's also rising on the eastern side of the sun, which means that we see her in the morning on the eastern horizon at sunrise. And on the chart, she's about 10 degrees away from the sun. Now, it's around 10 or 15 degrees. There is a variation in the ancient texts, but personally, from my observation, I tend to find it's about 10 degrees in the morning sky that I can see her, because if you think about it, she rises before the sun, so the sky is already dark, and there's enough of a contrast for me to be able to see Venus in the morning sky. Whereas in the evening sky, I find it's more at the 15-degree level, because we're moving then to seeing Venus just after sunset, and we're working with a backdrop that's, you know, more sunlight, so there's less of a contrast. So that's just my little personal observation, that the morning star tends to be a little bit earlier than we can physically see her. So she's still retrograde at this stage, and you'll see the other difference is that she's also started to separate from the sun, and she's also now the morning star. And then we get to the other next significant point in her cycle is when she turns direct. And you'll see on your chart, there'll be a little S or a D, you know, around about that time. And at this stage, she's not only slow, she's actually stopped, because she's changing directions. So she's now changed from retrograde to direct. She's still visible. And instead of separating from the sun, she's now chasing the sun. So they're the 5 conditions of Venus at this stage. And the next important point in the cycle is the maximum morning elongation. And this is when Venus makes the most biggest distance between her and the sun. And we can clearly see her by this stage. And on the chart, you'll see, up to a 48-degree difference between the sun and Venus. She's ahead of the sun by 48 degrees. And she's also starting to slow down at this stage. So she would be considered, say, a moderate speed compared to her average sort of motion. She's still direct, visible, and applying. And then the next important point is that she starts to make her morning set, which is when she starts to go back to within the sun's beams, and she's invisible by this stage because she's within the sun's beams. She's still direct and applying, and she's gaining speed at this time. And then we get to the halfway point of the Venus cycle. This is called either the superior or exterior conjunction. And exterior because she's now on the outside of the sun, still in alignment, but this time on the outside. And you'll see her in the chart. She'll still look like the conjunction together with the sun, but she's now at that opposite end. And she's really fast at this stage. She's direct and she's invisible. She's no longer at this exact point. She's no longer a morning or evening star because she's at the cazimi, and she's not separating or applying because she's right on the sun. But the moment she moves past that sun, she'll be separating and she'll be an evening star. And then the next point we look to is the evening heliacal rise. So this is like the morning rise, except it's on the other side of the sun, where we start seeing her on the western horizon right after sunset. Right after sunset. So she's after the sun. And so this is where you probably need to wait for the 15 degrees difference to be able to see her clearly, in my personal experience. And she's still very fast. She's now visible. She's still direct, and she's separating from the sun. And then she gets to her maximum elongation, which is the furthest distance she gets from the sun on the evening side, which is about the time we're in right now. So if you all head out this evening, just after sunset, you'll see in the western sky a bright star pop up, kind of at about 2 o'clock, symbolically on the clock. And that bright star is Venus. She's nearly at her maximum evening elongation. And she's starting to slow down. So she's moderate speed at this stage. She's direct, visible, and applying to the sun. And soon she'll be stationing retrograde in December. And this is where, so just so you know, she always stationed retrograde at the evening phase of her cycle. It's never in the morning phase. It's always at the evening phase. And that's when you know she's about to finish her 584 days. So that's just a little note you can put at the back of your mind. And at this stage, she's not only very slow, she has stopped to a complete halt, and she turns retrograde, which means that she's now still applying to the sun and visible. So I just want to go back to the evening and morning elongations. When she gets to the elongation point, she has to change direction because she's the furthest away from the sun. So just keep that in mind, because we're going to be interpreting this change of direction from separating to applying a bit later on. So we've gone through the retrograde, and then we get to the evening heliacal set. So like the morning heliacal set, this is when Venus goes within the beams of the sun, and the big change here is now she's gone from visible to invisible, and she's getting very slow, and she's about to go back to that interior or inferior conjunction stage and start a whole new cycle. So this is what the geometry looks like when you see Venus make this pattern in the sky. But when you make 5 Venus cycles, which takes 8 Earth years, she then proceeds to make this rosette pattern. Now, we don't really have much time to go into the sacred geometry of this, but there is a lot to this. And this is what I'll be covering in the workshop, because in the workshop, we'll be talking about the sacred geometry and looking and applying the sacred geometry to the natal chart and looking at ways we can draw out this unfoldment of the Venus cycle in our charts and in our clients' charts through some reflective exercises that we can do. But we're not going to go through that today. It's just too much. We're going to be focusing on the astronomical movements, which is what you see today, which is what we see here in our modern, very logical, rational minds. And you'll see that 584 days is around 18, 19 months. And each half is a morning or evening star. So each half of the Venus cycle equates to 9 months. And notice that that correlates to the 9-month gestation period of a human being. And Venus traditionally was the symbol of fertility. Now, to the ancient world, like the Sumerians who looked at Venus, the same Venus that we see in the sky is the same Venus they saw, but they saw it much differently. They saw it through the myth of Inanna or Ishtar. This story not only depicts the phenomenal experience of Venus as she goes through each of the phases, but it was also a memory palace for them to remember and remind themselves what astronomical movements Venus was doing in the sky. So we see here that the story is made up of 3 major components: the descent into the underworld, which is the morning star phase, the underworld phase where she visits her sister Ereshkigal, or and that's sort of related to Lilith, and she's killed there and resurrected. So that all happens in that superior conjunction invisibility phase. And then she ascends back up to her throne, and this is represented by the evening star phase. And then we start the whole cycle again. So we're going to break this even further down into a story about Inanna. So the journey begins at this interior conjunction or inferior conjunction phase at the bottom. And this is where Inanna acquires a whole heap of powers through somewhat of an interesting story with her grandfather Enki in a drinking sort of session. And in his drunken stupor, he decides to give Inanna all these powers. And Inanna says, "Thank you very much, I'll be taking those." And she sets on this quest to see her sister in the underworld, knowing full well that everyone that heads to the underworld will not be able to leave the underworld. But she heads in there with bold confidence, because one of the powers that she acquires is the power to be able to ascend. And so she thought, I'll be right, I'll be able to come back up. And so off she goes. And meanwhile, Enki wakes up from his drunken stupor and thinks, oh my goodness, what have I done? She can't have these powers. And she sends out these monsters to look for her. And this is the sun, in this combustion phase. Like, this is all happening in this combustion phase. And so here she is as the morning star, boldly and youthfully and somewhat naively walking to her death in the underworld. And she's considered to be the warrior goddess at this stage. And it's depicted here by this picture of Inanna in the ancient sculptures of all her weapons that she has with her roaring lion. She's at this stage considered to be radiant and thundering, destructive and defiant and somewhat judgmental. And to the ancient Sumerians, when she starts heading out of this combustion of the sun, this is when they would plan for wars, because this is the really strong essence of Inanna in her most masculine essence, her warrior essence. And then she heads through these gates of the underworld. So at this stage, Ereshkigal, her dark sister, who is the queen of the underworld, has got word that Inanna is coming. She tells all of her gatekeepers to make sure she comes stripped bare and naked and honoring her. And so she has to pass through these 7 gates. And at each 7 gates, she's stripped of each one of her powers that she brings with her. So of all the powers that she got from Enki, she decides to adorn herself with 7 of the main ones. And so at the first one, she's asked to remove her crown, which symbolizes her authority as a queen. And she questions the gatekeeper and says, well, you can't take my crown. I'm the queen of the heavens. And they say to her, quiet, Inanna, the ways of the underworld are perfect and they may not be questioned. So she takes off her crown and leaves it at the gate of that gatekeeper. Then she moves on to that second gate. And again, she's stopped. And to her surprise, she's asked to remove her royal staff. And this represents her brow chakra. And she is, this is the gate of the power of her perception. This is that. And you'll notice that at each of these gates, she removes these powers and they all relate to each of the 7 chakra systems. So she then gets the same response, you know, Inanna, the ways of the underworld are perfect and they may not be questioned. So she goes on through these 7 gates, and this is, and these 7 gates are representative of the 7 chakras, and they're also seen astronomically in the 7 months that Venus is visible by Venus and the waning crescent moon making a conjunction in the morning sky. And the waning moon represents the stripping away of her power. So of the 9 months that she's the morning star, seven of those months are visible, and you'll see that in the morning sky, and every month as she passes through these gates in the story, you'll see Venus conjunct the waning crescent moon. So that's just something to look out for. And then she gets to the underworld. And at this stage, she's naked completely. She's stripped of all of her powers and she's bowing low in honor of Ereshkigal, who has just lost her husband. So clearly she's already mad and upset and at her very, I guess, intense stage. And this stage is also identified with Lilith, the personification of the underworld and the, I guess, dark side of Venus, because Ereshkigal is just the shadow side of Venus in this story. And, you know, we see her with these bird-like features and the, you know, representing all these demonic bird-like features that we see in the underworld. At one look of Inanna, Ereshkigal judges her and says and kills her, and she is essentially killed and hung on a meat hook. And so this is the phase of the Venus cycle where we experience a lot of relationship challenges. It's the biggest challenge of the Venus cycle, either relationship, relational connection, or creative challenges. We experienced this year from February till about May. You may want to reflect on what was happening with you at that time, because this was, you know, a very challenging part of the Venus cycle. So what happens here is that Inanna is very clever, and she actually sent a message to her loyal servant Ninshaba, who is Mercury, by the way. And she says, if I'm not back in 3 days, please send for help. And so Ninshaba waits for the 3 days and does send for help, and is able to get some medicine from Enki to come down to resurrect her. So what he does is he sends these 2 little emissaries, these 2 little flies that he knows can fly through these gates unseen with this medicine. And he says that if you see Ereshkigal, she'll be in pain. So sit with her and hold space. And once you get through Ereshkigal, you'll be able to see Inanna and give her 60 drops or 60 to 90 drops of this medicine, and she'll be revived and bring her body back. And so this is what happens. And the flies get to Ereshkigal. And at this stage, Ereshkigal is in labor pains. And this is symbolic of some kind of rebirth that's happening. And she's moaning and groaning, and the flies just sit there and hold space and are very compassionate and counsel her until she gets through her rebirth or the birth of her child. And she's so thankful for this compassion and help that she says, well, what can I offer you in return? And so these flies say, well, we want that body that's hanging up there on the meat hook. And so they said, oh, she said, well, that's Inanna. And she said, yes, we want Inanna and we want to take her back. And so she then offers Inanna's body back to these flies. And these flies give her 60 to 90 drops of this medicine. And this is symbolic of the 60 to 90 days that Venus is in the invisibility phase of her cycle. And so she then is reborn and resurrected. And this is the Venus Kazemi moment where she receives this medicine and new prana, a new life force. And they decide to then ascend back up to the heavens, which she has the power to do. But then just before she's about to leave the gate, the judges of the underworld say, hang on a second, you can't leave the underworld, because nobody leaves the underworld alive. But in your case, because you have that power to ascend, you must send a replacement. And so she then leaves the underworld with this whole entourage of the judges and the emissary, and with this heavy burden, and thinking that she has to send down a replacement to replace her in the underworld. And some poor innocent victim is going to be sent in her replacement. So she leaves the underworld with a very heavy consideration there. And so this is where we see Venus starting to make her heliacal rise. She's finished her 90 days, 60 to 90 days in the underworld. And she's now seen on that western horizon at sunset. And now we see a very different Inanna now. She's not just the naive and bold and brave Inanna. She's now extremely wise. She's just died and been resurrected. So imagine this new insight that she's had. She's extremely contemplative because she's got this big decision to make, and she is regenerated. So this is a very different Inanna coming home, and this is the difference between the morning star people and the evening star people. The evening star Inanna is more akin to this mother goddess type, you know, and we'll talk about this as we break this down later, what that means. So she then goes through, so you just see her depicted very differently. She's more contemplative. She now stands on two lions, and it symbolizes the collaborative approach of that evening star. And so she's now considered to be more kind, generous, peaceful, healing, more erotic, decisive, discerning, wise, transcendent, loving, fertile, and joyous. And then she heads through these 7 gates again. And she starts then by gaining back all these powers. And she starts from the base chakra, which was the last power that she left, or the last vestment that she left at the gate. And you'll see this as Venus as the waxing crescent moon on the western horizon. And this is what we're seeing now. Notice that this time it's the waxing crescent moon. It's the symbolism of gaining back of her powers. And you'll see this next week, she'll be making a conjunction with the moon. So I invite you all to head out there to look for the Venus waxing crescent moon, and she'll be gaining back her, it'll be her throat chakra. So the power of communication by that stage. So you can all look out for that in the sky. And then so she heads back, she gets back to her throne. She is then also, I believe, when she gets to her retrograde phase, this is when she has to make this decision as to who replaces her. And she looks around and she's extremely burdened and she's reviewing her whole life. And this is symbolized by that retrograde phase of reviewing. And she decides to send her husband, Dumuzi, in her replacement because she notices that everyone is lamenting for her except her husband, who's having a grand old time with all the other women in the powerful position of the king in which he inherited through her marriage. So she decides to send him back. And the story continues, but this stops here for us, and it starts a whole new cycle again. So this is the story that the Sumerians told, not only to understand the mood and the phenomenal experience of what we go through as Venus makes her movements with the sun, but it also is how they remember all of the astronomy associated with it. So I'd like to now look at where Venus was in this phase in your natal chart. And I think, Donna, if you could put that link that I put in up on the chat box or the Q&A box, people will be able to click to that link and I'll explain how that is read. But firstly, I want to just mention that we'll be looking at these 5 conditions today. So orientation, morning or evening star, motion, whether she's direct or retrograde, visibility, whether she's invisible or visible, direction, applying or separating to the sun, or whether she's fast or slow. So Donna's kindly put that link up in the chat.
Hey there,
box.
I just want to let everyone know it's there and it's in the answered. If you go to the Q&A, it's in the answered section and it says the link will show here and the link is on there.
Oh, thank you so much, Donna.
Yeah.
That's great. So this is the only curly part of the presentation, so I'm hoping there's no tech issues, but that link should bring you to an ephemeris that I've painstakingly put together because it's not actually easy to see this on Solarfire or some program. There are programs now that you can use, but I don't have that program. So what you would do is that you would find where you were born, and you'll find that you're probably born in between 2 lines. So in this example of the 1st of May, it falls between the direct and in greatest brilliancy lines of the table. So what you would do is to go back to the line. Oh crap, the link's not working. You would go back to the line. Hang on, I'll sort that out in a minute. You would go back to the line before your birth and then follow that line across. And I've listed all of these parameters for you, whether it's morning star, direct, visible, separating, or slow. Now, Caroline's just said that the link is not working. Has anyone experienced?
Yeah, it looks like the link I have for it is maybe the wrong one. I have enter and then I have enter psycle.com/Kepler.
Oh no, it's the long one. The long. Sorry about that. I should have clarified. That short one is for people to get an email to them, which we'll send out with the recording. Because I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Let's see here. Well, we will post it.
Can I put the link up?
Yeah, let's see. If you answer, if you want to type the answer, if you go to Q&A and you see open and you hit type answer to one of those.
Sure, okay, I've just done that to somebody.
And then you can paste, were you able to do that? Oh, there we go.
Yes.
So everyone, it's under the answered portion of the Q&A.
Can everyone see that now?
And that works.
Oh, great. Excellent. Sorry about that. I knew this was, if I was more techie, I'd be able to work out a better solution. But this is sort of all coming out from my personal file, so it was the easiest way I could do this. But yeah, so basically find your birth date, and you don't have to have specific times. This is the great thing about following these synodic cycles. It's not about being really, specific about the times. Just find the date of your birthday, go to the line before so that you can find the line that's already happened. And then you go and look at all the parameters that's associated with that phase that you were born. And we're going to pull this apart in the next few slides. So I'll give everyone maybe another minute to look that up, and then we'll proceed to dissecting all of these parameters. We're going to be starting with the morning star, evening star phase first, and you'll probably notice that I've already talked about this as much as I could interject into that story. Everything kind of interweaves into everything here. So hopefully by this stage, you've already got a sense of what it's like to be a morning star birth or an evening star birth. Okay, so I might proceed now, and just in the interest of time. So here we see the morning star phase, if you're a morning star person. And when you are a morning star, this Venus will have been seen on the eastern horizon. And like I said before, this is the adolescent, youthful nature of Inanna, and hence your personal archetype of Venus. And general traits could be spontaneity and eagerness, impulsiveness, being passionate, extroverted, energetic, resilient, idealistic, independent, assertive, and people that are more upfront and direct about their feelings and needs, outgoing and optimistic. Now, I can send out these, I'm happy to share these slides, so don't feel you have to rush and write down all of the these words, just so you know. So these are some scenarios that could look like morning star people. People that act first and think later. They wear their heart on their sleeves. They're certainly more emotionally resilient than the evening star types, all things being equal, because we have to look at other considerations in the chart. They're driven by their emotions and passions and ideals. Now, an example of this is that morning star types will say their creative independence is so strong, and their ideals so strong that it would override any relationship that they're in. If their partners are, say, don't completely align to their ideals or their creative passions, they would be more likely to end that relationship than to endure it, which is more an evening star phase. So all things being equal, without anything else being considered. They tend to call the shots in relationships or in life in general. They're out there to bravely get what they want. What you see is what you get. There's an honesty about them. And yeah, very focus on their own personal development. Then the evening star type we see is much different. And it's more about internalized emotions. They have some wiseness, as we saw Inanna leaving the underworld with this wise, heavy heart. And she's much more introverted and timid and subtle at that stage, which you may relate to as an evening star. There's more deliberateness in every action and considerations, more patient, self-giving, much more emotionally sensitive, a strong inner resilience and strength, and in intensity and intimacy in relationships, definitely a higher standard that they look for in their partners, highly committed and extremely philosophical and reflective. So some scenarios which might relate if you're an evening star is that they judge before their actions, sometimes too much, too considered, They really seek out meaningful relationships in their lives. They feel emotions extremely deeply. They also are less emotionally resilient than the morning star. So they may have difficulty letting go of relationship scars and harbor more, I guess, shadows and resentments and pains within their life. They have a willingness to sacrifice in relationships. So that example before about the morning star type, say, prioritizing their own creative and idealisms, the evening star types are more likely to stay within that relationships and sacrifice their own needs for the good of the relationship. They're more likely to wait for the right person to come to them than to pursue them. They consider others too much sometimes. They're more likely to lead from a very feminine instinctual perspective where they guide and encourage rather than boldly take the bull by the horns and lead with a ferocious leadership style. And as partners or mothers, they can be overprotective or smothering at some levels. And I've just seen here, there's a question about what if you are at the superior conjunction? Exactly. You're not considered morning or evening star. Well, that's a whole interpretation in itself. It's a very, I guess, privileged time to be born because you're in with the king's chariot. You're not morning star or evening star, but it's really, this then comes down to that exact moment you'll have to see in your time of birth that the moment that Venus moves away from the exact conjunction is the morning or evening star. So this is when you have to drill down to the exact time. And greatest brilliancy, just ignore that for the moment. I just want you to follow that line to the parameters so that you can understand this part of the slide. And I'll talk about greatest brilliancy as we head to the transit section. So that'll make more sense then.
Sorry.
Yep.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So what would you say for someone who has, for instance, it jumps from August, looking at mine, it's okay, I'm looking at the year I was born, and it'll say Venus is in a certain sign, but that's not the sign it's in for me. And then I go to the next year and it's in the sign that it's in for me.
Yeah, so don't worry about all that. That's all going to come in our next workshop. All I want you to do is go to the columns that say Venus cycle parameters so that you can find out whether you're morning or evening star, fast, slow, direct, visible, etc.
Okay.
And so that you can understand. So these slides make more sense to you.
Yes. So listen up. Let's go to the workshop, everyone, and figure this out. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, I know it's a bit complicated. I hope I haven't lost everybody, but I'll keep an eye on the questions. So now, direct or visible. So the thing is with the direct, it's mainly direct. Venus is mainly direct, and this represents 90% of the population. So being in a direct Venus phase is not so much a condition in itself. Certainly from a traditional astrology perspective, it's one of the conditions that say that you have, it adds to the strength of a planet, but it's more the point about it being not direct. It's more the point that it's not retrograde. So there's not much to say here other than, you may have a stronger Venus in terms of it showing up as a more forward approach to relationships, less interruptions in one's relationship agenda, or greater confidence and more purpose-driven. Michelle Finey, who is an Australian astrologer who's written a really great book called The Sacred Dance of Venus and Mars, which I've got on the last slide as a reference. She signifies that exact moment that Venus goes direct by transit as a significant time of new relationships. So we'll talk about this more in the transit section. But so just keep in mind that direct is just kind of a point of not being retrograde, which we'll talk about now. So the retrograde phase of the Venus cycle, statistically, Michelle quotes that it's about 7% of the population. I'm not sure how you get that, but I guess someone's crunched the numbers on that. And now traditionally, when retrograde planets are, one of the considerations will add a tick towards being of, bad condition or having some kind of debility. And if we actually look at the retrograde phase, it's the last part of the Venus evening star phase and the beginning part of the Venus morning star phase. So even that tells you that there is a nuance between being retrograde as an evening star and retrograde as a morning star. So what we find is that being retrograde will show up as, more the quiet types in the world. They have a tendency to turn inwards and have this sort of hermetic, like hermit quality, especially around their relationship nature or the way they connect with other people. They tend to kind of stand back a little bit. And the condition of retrograde traditionally is this idea of being countercultural, that it's something about being a bit alternative or having a bit of a twist to the way you do things to do with that planet. So in the case of Venus, it may be around being in unconventional relationships or being inwardly misunderstood by people on the outside, or somehow feeling a little bit different on the outer. And there's a big part of the Venus retrograde journey, which is characterized by encounters of the shadows or the shadow aspect in life. And it's common to see Venus retrograde types holding a lot of trauma, often from very fated incidents in childhood. It could be incidents to do with loss or abandonment or shame, or sometimes abuse or rejection. And this continues to underlie a lot of their relationship dynamics into adulthood. And this repeat patterning often shows up in the choices that they make with their relationship life. And if they can confront this kind of pain and turn it around, Venus retrograde types can be extremely powerful healers. So it's more of a tricky kind of condition to have. And so some scenarios that this may look like for Venus retrograde phase, all things being equal, is that they are types to question traditional morals and values. And they have this ability to withstand and absorb extremely difficult emotions, despite how painful it can be. They do have a difficulty relating to people on a superficial level. So on the evening star retrograde phase, they have more of that difficulty. Whereas the morning star phase, I think that ability to quietly consume and hold pain is definitely much harder for that morning star retrograde than it is for that evening star retrograde. So can you see that nuance that I'm pulling in together, these two different aspects of that retrograde, whether you're a morning star retrograde or an evening star retrograde? Definitely, I think it's harder for that morning star retrograde to be in that retrograde phase, because it really goes against the morning star symbolism. Anyway, in retrograde conditions, Venus may have be more submissive on the outside, but they have this strong inner strength, and they lack confidence in creating relationships, but they have this power to magnetize and to draw certain people into their lives. And it's often related to their fated story around what they experienced in youth. And another thing I've seen is that retrograde phase shows more delays and twists and turns in the relationship journey. So something a bit more complex there. So then we get to this visibility aspect. And again, like the direct, Venus is more visible most of the time. So it's not about being visible that is a specific condition. It's more the fact that you're not invisible, if you know what I mean. So in Inanna's quest, the visible stage are those 7 months that she's in the morning star and evening star phase, where we can see her in the east and west respectively. So symbolically, what it means when Venus is visible is that it can look that she can be comfortable about being in public with her relationships because she's able to be seen and more comfortable with that. There's a straightforward, upfront, honest approach. There's a tendency to openly engage in relationships and more likeliness to gain opportunities because you're putting yourself out there, more able to be seen. Whereas the invisibility phase is much more complex, just like that retrograde phase. And again, this is a much smaller portion of the population that has this. And this idea of invisibility is around 2 periods again. There's the invisible being a morning star and the invisible part being the evening star, because it flanks both ends of the shift between morning star and evening star phase. So this is a little nuance that you may want to identify for yourself and your clients. So the key thing about the invisibility phase is that there's this great transmutation principle around it. Because if you think about it, she's moving either from an evening star to a morning star or from a morning star to an evening star. And in between that, she makes this conjunction to the sun, whether it's in inferior or exterior versions.
Quick question. Question, since you just mentioned that. Someone asked, what qualities does Venus show while in exact conjunction with the sun?
Oh, okay. I mentioned that before. You would have to go down to the exact time of your birth and look at exactly whether she falls before or after the sun. But you would definitely be invisible at this stage and have this, great transmutational qualities.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so, so the idea that when she makes this transition, she has to pass through this conjunction with the sun. And that conjunction of the sun, she's in that, the king's chariot. Or in this case, the sun is symbolic of the king or the partner that she's so desperately is seeking this sacred union. So if you are born in this stage, it's this idea of receiving something, gaining new light, gaining prana and vitality. In the story of Inanna, this is when she's resurrected. She's received the medicine. In the morning star phase in the story of Inanna, she's received these powers from her grandfather, her paternal archetype, these knees or these powers that she's able to receive. So there is some receptivity there of gaining special power, gaining special gifts. And I think it's quite a lucky time if you were born exact on the degree, but definitely look at the exact time of birth and look at if it falls 1 second before the sun, it's either morning or evening star based on which orientation you were born in. So anyway, at this invisibility stage, at the Inanna has to, well, if we're looking at that superior conjunction, she has to sacrifice her youth or her at the inferior. Oh, sorry, I'm getting all mixed up here. She has to make some kind of sacrifice, essentially, to be able to shift from morning to evening star. That's the point I'm trying to make. So in that, she's making a great transmutation. And we see this in people where they have this quality, whether they're really great healers or can shift people's mindsets and move people in a transformative way, or in a very mundane sense, they can be just really great at restoring things, whether it's renovating or repurposing things in crafts and stuff like that. So within the context of relationships, this can look like someone that's extremely private and introverted because she's invisible, don't forget. There's a secrecy or something hidden in their relationship nature. There's also a tendency to burn out in relationships. Don't forget, she's combust the sun. She's being overpowered at this stage. And so people in general might really take a lot out of you or drain your energy. And there's this idea of submitting to power or being overpowered because there's this great force of the sun being so close to you. So that's what it can look like in relationship life. So then we look at the application or separation from the sun. We're nearly there, so well done for staying here. It is quite technical. It can, when you pull it all apart. So this idea of applying to the sun, it happens when in the morning star, when you're at the end of the morning star phase or at the end of the evening star phase. And this is all about seeking union with the king or the partner. And from a relational perspective, it has a lot to do with independency or dependency, whether you're applying or separating. So applying suggests this notion of dependency, whereas separating suggests the notion of independence. So when Venus is wanting to apply to the sun, she's certainly seeking some kind of, there's a neediness or a need to be in relationship. Whereas when she's applying, she is separating from the partner or the king and ready to imbue her own essence. So if you think about the idea of Venus conjoining with the sun, receiving this new light, this new vitality and prana, she's now resurrected. And in this resurrection phase, she's now ready to bring that out and live her life in a new light, in a new way. So this is what that separation is like. And it can look like, sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself. So in that separation type, it can look like people that seek independence in relationships, or they also value new ways to shine, or they want to be seen in a new light. They don't want to be identified with that sun anymore. They are now their own essence. And Michelle Finey in her book as well, which I've used as a bit of a Bible for this, talks about the importance of this stage of withdrawing from parental support. Now, sometimes this can be seen as a fated thing as a child where the parents withdraw their support through no fault of their own, or there can be some sense of alienation experience in their youth, which makes this idea of fending for yourself from an early age, or an idea of needing to maybe break free from the parental bonds in order to be able to thrive in your own essence. Or there may be, I've seen, consciously getting into your own relationships that are different to your parents' relationships as a statement about who you are. So these are just some things that could look like, and you may want to add to this yourselves based on your own experience. So last we look at speed, and this is very straightforward. It's about, well, being fast, very yang, active, energy, effective, quick and swift, opportunistic and enthusiastic. Whereas the slowness is a yin feeling. It's about going within. There's a sluggishness to Venus's condition here. There's an inertia, a lethargic sense. This idea of maybe taking a bit more time to go about your ways and achieving the significations of Venus, and perhaps more hesitation. So this is a breakdown of all these Venus cycle parameters or conditions that you can use to get a bit more nuance in how you then interpret your Venus condition at birth, or at your clients. And what you would do is combine each of these 5 conditions together, synthesize them into an archetype of Venus for yourself or for your clients. So that's a little exercise that you can go through for yourself. But now I want to take you through how you look at these same conditions and points in terms of following transits. Okay. So if we go through, firstly, Kaylin, is there any questions before I move through to transits? Because it might be a good time to answer them now.
We have one question. So someone wants to know that they said that I and my daughter seem to be the same phase. Is that usual?
No. Yes and no. It depends what phase. Some of the phases are longer. So, for example, from direct to is it direct to? No, so greatest brilliance in the morning to say maximum elongation in the morning to morning set, for example. That's a very long phase. So it's often quite common that a lot of people fall into that time frame. But yeah, if you had, say, something like a retrograde phase, that's something a bit more special, unusual. And that talks about more, family karmic type stuff there. So yes and no is my answer. So just look at, the time frame that those phases take. Okay, so when we want to follow Venus transits, now, like take for example, now if you're following the Venus cycle, you'll know that she's closing in, coming up to her maximum elongation in the evening phase. And, as you follow this cycle, you'll start to just know this, and you'll start to look at the moon and Venus being in conjunction, and you can know, oh, okay, we're at one of these 7 visible times or these chakra points. Okay, so it's a really good practice to start attuning yourself to this cycle, because it is really magical following this on its own. But what we want to do when you're following it in transits is actually hone in on these bold points that I've got in the column. So for the 584 days that she's in her cycle, how many is there? I think there's like 11 or 12 or something, like 11 of these points of these 11 of these days of these 584 days is something to watch for. And it's something to watch for because you'll see that Venus makes a change in one of these parameters. Okay, besides the greatest brilliancy phase, but that's something that's a little bit different, which I'll talk about in a second. So what you want to watch for is in the inferior or interior conjunction. It's a time of new beginnings and initiation at birth and a gaining of that, an inner power and inner strength, represented by Enki giving Inanna those means, those powers. And don't forget, he gives them to Inanna in a state of drunkenness. So there's a cathartic kind of unconsciousness around this power being gained and somehow a lack of awareness around it. So you can look out for these Venus interior conjunction points in transits as a description of what's happening at the time of that moment. And then at the morning rise, this is also an important time to watch out for. And I always make it a practice to make sure I see Venus make the physical rise in the morning. So yes, getting up early is one of the things that I do for Venus. And it is said, the ancients said that having the light touch your face gives you, changes something, it transmutes something, it changes something within you. So I always like to have the light of the planets physically touch my skin or my face, and to do meditations at that stage. And that can be all around, I guess, things you can look out for, like Michelle Finey mentioned, that this time can indicate new relationships or new creative projects, new ideas start to emerge. And often look at the house that this morning rise point falls in, because this is actually going to indicate an important topic for you for the next 9-month unfoldment for Venus. So if this morning rise phase this year happened in the house of Gemini, so wherever that was at the start of the cycle in June last year, the 9 months from June to 9 months after that will have been very important for that house Gemini was in your chart. Then watching where Venus makes her direct station, this is when you'll see forward momentum in whatever house that falls in, and also bringing in that morning rise house as well, because that's going to stick with you as a journey for the next 9 months. And I think a lot of people probably already watch for this. Now, greatest brilliancy, we don't cover this as one of the points because it's usually stays the same parameters as the line before. But what this means is that Venus is the brightest in the sky. So you can watch this in transits though, because you can physically see that she's very bright. And it often shows significant relationships showing up at this stage, being acknowledged or appreciated for the work that you do around this Venus story, because we're drawing on that symbolism of being able to see Venus, haven't been very visible, so needing to be very comfortable or around that. So if you're someone that's like a evening star retrograde type, this could be very confronting for you at this time. This is also a time where you could receive like promotions, recognitions, or opportunities to be seen. And you want to also check whether this falls on any angles or natal placements in your chart, because this is where Venus's light will be shining in a very obvious way. So get ready for some visibility around that aspect of your life. And then we get to maximum morning elongation. This is also another point that's important to look at, because if you think of the distance it makes from the sun, it adds to the clarity and illumination of Venus. It's kind of like a full moon kind of situation there. And this is the time we have to make commitments or a decision. And the reason is because we have to change directions here. Venus has gone to the furthest point, separating from the sun, and now she changes directions to have to apply back to the sun. So this often translates in phenomenal experience to this idea about needing to be maybe more collaborative with something or someone around your Venus project or story. Maybe looking at seeking more partnerships at this stage, or yes, just somehow making more of a commitment around something to do with the Venus story. Then that morning heliacal set is also another important point to look out for. And this is where we enter a very challenging time of the Venus story. Often it is challenging times that we head into with relationships. We're heading into the shadow aspects of the Venus expressions, which can look like jealousy or neediness, narcissism, being self-absorbed or insecure, somewhat craving of attention. And these next 60 to 90 days that the morning heliacal set heralds is often when you'll see lots of clients come to you with relationship readings and even you experiencing relationship issues yourself. And then the superior or exterior conjunction of the Venus cycle, that's something to watch out for in transits. This is where we can tend to get some very obvious gifts from Venus. And this is the point of her resurrection. So being able to receive new light, a new breath, or a new perspective of something in that Venus story. Then you also want to look out for the evening heliacal rise. And this is when we have to, this is also very important because it's the birth of the evening star. So again, just like the morning star, you want to see what house this falls in. And this happened in May this year. So if you look back into what house, which is Taurus, where Venus was making her evening heliacal rise, that house is currently a story for this current 9-month period, and you may want to reflect on that. And you may have also felt a big shift at that time of really coming out into a big transmutation of your relationship life. There may have been some resolution or a shift in perspective around relationships or creative projects for you at that time. And then we get to the maximum evening elongation, and notice this happens now before the greatest brilliancy on the evening side, whereas in the morning side, the greatest brilliancy happened before maximum elongation. And if we look at the whole picture of the Venus cycle, you'll see it's actually symmetrical. If you fold it in half, it's a symmetrical image. So this is again another shift in directions. We're now separating up until the point of the elongation, and we need to make a commitment or a decision to have to then apply back to the sun. So this can often be a slowing down and going within, becoming more yin in your perspective, retraction, passive, slowing, that kind of thing. And then the greatest brilliancy on that evening star phase, again, we see again more visibility, but this time it seems to be more of an intrinsic level because it's happening on the evening star phase. Yes, acknowledgement, but we may see that more around the inner circle. Being seen, promotions, opportunities also comes into that. It may be about you seeing yourself in a different light, acknowledging yourself in a different way. And again, check what angles this falls on and what natal planets it activates by transits. Oh, sorry, we didn't go through retrograde. And this is, again, retrograde, something to look out for in transit. The time is coming where we're really pulling in and being reflective, reviewing our relationships. This often shows up as even past partners and relationships coming back to you to help instigate a reflective process within you. There's this idea of searching for meaning and purpose in a big way. And again, accessing some of the shadow traits that you may have in relationships. So in transits, one way to remember all of this is to even go back to your chart and go, okay, what's the difference in condition here? So from the inferior stage to the morning rise, we see the big change is visibility. So that visible symbolism is what you want to bring in to your transit interpretations. If you see Venus transiting a certain point in your chart and she's made that step from being invisible to visible, that's essentially the big story you want to talk about. And you'll see at each stage, there's one big story. So at the next stage, Venus becomes direct. So that's what you want to talk about in your transit interpretation. And it goes on. And I've highlighted what the key step change or the delta is in all of them. It's all about looking for the change in condition. And you'll see at the greatest brilliancy to the maximum elongation stage, there's two changes here because nothing actually happens in the greatest brilliancy. It's at the stage of status. It's in a way symbolic of saying this is Venus in her greatest brilliance, and she's staying there, being paused in condition for you to see. So this is what you can look out for in the Venus transits, which you can see has a slight nuance to looking at it natally. Now, looking at it from a magical and ceremonial perspective, and this is, I've done some work with Venus. It's obviously a lifetime work. One simple thing you can do, and I encourage all of you to do this, is to just generally follow her cycle, because you will really notice the magic as she makes these shifts in her astronomical movements. And there is this process of following the Venus-Moon conjunctions, which there are now a growing movement of Venus followers out there who do look at this. And here's a calendar, which I can also send you, of the current cycle that dates each time Venus makes her Venus-Moon conjunction throughout her whole cycle. So in this morning star phase, it will be the morning star, the waning crescent moon that you see on the east. And then in the evening star phase, it will be the waxing crescent moon conjunction with Venus that we see on the west. And we're currently at September 9th here at the throat chakra. So we're falling into this, the end of the Venus cycle. Okay, and so what you can do is at these moments, again, head out there, let the light of Venus and the moon touch your face, and you may want to do a meditation, you may just want to have a conversation, do some writing, whatever your practice is from a meditative, ceremonial, magical perspective. These are optimal times where you can get these transmissions. And other optimal times is all these points that I have here on the left, which is the inferior conjunction, the morning rise, the maximum elongation, the superior conjunction, evening rise, and the maximum elongation. Now, these are, I guess, more great Venus times to be able to work with if you wanted to elect, say, a Venus election. Now, you would also, I think, have to, if you were going to make a talisman, you would also have to look at all the other talismanic astrological election rules, but having something that links up with these moments is like super, super powerful. And we had that moment this year when Venus made her evening heliacal rise, evening rise, and she was also in the sign of Taurus. Now, I decided to have a process of firstly going out to see that first heliacal rise of Venus, which is very often more difficult to see. But the moment I did that, I then went back and I made a Venus hydrosol with rose petals, which I had already prepared and collected on the Venus hour in the lead up to that. But that's something that I did personally, and it's worked really well. And it's something that you could consider as another layer of your magical elections, which, as if it wasn't complicated enough already. But I also wanted to talk about, in this great book called Inanna, the Queen of Heaven and Earth, her stories from the hymns of, her stories and hymns from Sumer. And if you wanted to work with the Venus magic and specifically with Inanna, this is a book I highly recommend. I've only just been able to get my hands on it, but in it there are these hymns that you could recite on these specific moments, and there is so much information there. If you wanted to study this text, I think you'll be able to draw out a really powerful magical process here. And I just wanted to highlight that there were 4 hymns that really stood out to me. And one of them, which was the Loud Thunder and Storm hymn, to me, it clearly talks about a monthly ritual that this was done with. It even mentions that, quote, the crescent moon reaches its fullness. And so for me, it was no surprise that that hymn was actually said at every month when they saw the Venus and the crescent moon conjunctions. Now, the book doesn't actually tell you this. These are just some of my own personal putting the pieces together, and I could be totally wrong, but I truly believe that's what that hymn was designed around. And then there's a hymn that's called Lady of the Morning Star. Reading that hymn, it sounded to me that this was said around the maximum morning elongation. And the Lady of the Evening Star hymn that was clearly to me a hymn that was recited at the evening maximum elongation. Now, there was also another hymn called the Sacred Marriage Rites. And just by the sound of that, that sounds to me like a Venus cazimi, like a Venus conjunction to the sun type of hymn that I would, be comfortable in reciting. And there's a couple of quotes there that also points out to some of the logistical things. One of them is that they say the people cleanse the rushes with sweet smelling cedar oil. So it suggests that cedar oil is something that we can use in our ceremonial ritual work. Then another quote, the people bring food and offerings in bowls. They burn juniper resin, perform laving rites and pile up sweet smelling incense. So juniper resin is something, if you can get your hands on, might be really good for this. And the idea of bathing, laving rites, ceremonial bathing, and Venus being associated with cleanliness is something that they've incorporated here. And sweet smelling incenses, well, Venus rules the sweet smelling incenses and smells. And another quote that I wanted to draw to your attention is the idea that they talk about music, about loud instruments which drowns out the southern storms. They play string instruments, to be more specific, which brings joy to all the people. So you may want to incorporate loud and stringed instruments or even singing into your ceremonial work. And this is all stuff that I have got from reading this book. And there's much more to it that I really encourage you, if you wanted to work from a ceremonial perspective, this book is just, invaluable. And just invaluable in general in terms of even understanding the myth of Inanna. Now, I wanted to end with another poem or hymn, an homage, which was written by Becca Tarnas, who I've got permission to share this with you, because you can always write your own and have your own idiosyncratic style to your own ceremonies. And Becca allowed me to share this with you, where she wrote a poem about homage to all of the planets. And I think this would also be a great a hymn to recite to Venus. And it says, Venus, a verdant green, flowering beauty, vines growing in curls that turn into exquisite art, the silver sparkling of dew under leaves, a mirroring of reciprocity of love and heartwarming presence, the shiver of pleasure and desire. So I'm sure Becca would be thrilled for you to join in her homage to Venus in this way. And I wanted to also share with you the resources that may be really helpful for you. Firstly, if you would like a copy of the Venus Ephemeris, you could head to this link here and I'll email you. I think Kaylin is going to email this link out with the recording. So if you don't grab it now, you can get that in that email.
Yes,
or you can,
I will send it out.
yeah. Or we can put it in the chat now if you want. So again, I've spoken about this book, this ancient book on the Inanna, and this, by the way, was translated by Samuel Noah Kramer, he was the direct translator of the cuneiform tablets in which the Inanna story came from. So in essence, he is the translator of the oldest story known to man or womankind. So if you want to get the direct horse's mouth, this is the book to get. Then there's The Sacred Dance of Venus and Mars by Michelle Finey, another really great resource for understanding the Venus cycle. And I know Adam Gainsbourg has written a book about the light of Venus following the synodic cycle, and he's done a lot of work with the synods. And also the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, or maybe it might be Shamanic Mystery Astrology School. They also do a lot of work with this Venus cycle as well. And they're also one to follow for this, if you want to follow in this work. And so thank you for your time. Thank you for making it this far in the presentation. If you have any questions, I don't know if we've got time for questions, but I can definitely stay and answer some questions for the next 10 or so minutes.
Let's see, maybe a couple minutes. The end. Let's see here. The one question is, can we track our personal Venus cycle on the progress chart? Does it work that way?
Yes, you can. You can. That just adds in another layer of interpretation to it, but definitely, totally, you should do that. Especially like, these moments when they go from, if Venus goes direct to retrograde, that's often a huge one. But now you've got all these extra points that you can track, like the moving from invisible to visibility. Like that would be a huge one to track in your progress chart. So lots of homework for you to do now.
Great, thank you so much. Let's see. It's saying I don't know this. I can't. Okay, I'll just read the question. What planet, sign, or aspect would one look to if the parameters one has look more like the opposite one? So, for instance, visible acts more like invisible, or evening is more like morning. Does that mean they have a debilitated Venus somehow?
Oh, okay. I think you meant visible is more like morning. Yeah, so this is the skill, I guess, of the astrologer, the whole idea of synthesizing. This adds another layer of synthesis that you need to bring in order to specifically synthesize your own Venus archetype. And yes, as you all know, as astrologers, when we synthesize things, we always come into some direct contradictions. And so if you are a morning star, for example, and you're invisible, I would then, to help you, look at exactly where that is in the cycle, and you'll know that she's heading into, that she's heading out of a conjunction from the sun, or about to head into the conjunction of the sun. And then maybe reflect on what part of the story of Inanna that comes in to play, and then use that as your guide to decipher what kind of morning star person you are. I hope that makes sense. And this is why I wanted to tell you the astronomy and the story and the myth, because I'm hoping you'll be able to mesh those two together to, on the fly, think of exactly what Venus's phenomenal experience is at a certain time.
Great, thank you so much. Everyone is very appreciative of this presentation. It's been exhaustive, and yeah, we have a lot of interesting work ahead of us, and we look forward to your workshop. If you don't mind, do you have any, I'm curious, do you take private readings, private consultations?
Yes, I do. Maybe I'll just show you. I can be contacted here. I do private readings. I also do mentoring, if you like. Yeah, I'm also teaching a solar returns course right now, if anyone's interested in that. So just hit me up if you are interested in this 4-week solar returns course. Yeah.
Wonderful. That sounds fascinating. Well, thank you again. This has been very interesting, and I can't wait to learn more from you. You're a wonderful teacher and absolutely amazing presenter. So thank you again. And for everyone who might have missed it, the Venus phase link is in the Q&A, and so is the donation link. So check those out, and we will, let me check really quickly. Let's see if I share my screen. Let's see if where we are with the donations. Okay, so we've raised, so I don't need to share my screen, but we've raised $30 so far. So thank you whoever donated, and we appreciate all of the donations we can get to really help support our community moving forward. Thank you again, Shu, and have a wonderful day. Thanks for joining us from Australia. We really
Thank you.
appreciate you. And you keep getting a lot of thank yous and an excellent lecture. Excellent. Yeah, people are very excited. So let's see. Donation link. Yes, that is in the question. I will post it again. We are navigating this for the first time. Let's see here, or the second time. This is the second time we really posted these links, and we're really excited to make them available for everyone. So there we go. Okay. Thank you, Shu. And thank you everyone for attending. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.